Hey there, dreamers. Welcome back to Hypothetical, the cozy corner where we drift through the wonders of our world softly and curiously. I'm so happy you've decided to spend a quiet moment, whether it's night, morning, or that calm in between, unwinding here with me. Today, I invite you to settle deeply into your most comfortable chair, perhaps with a warm drink cradled in your hands, and let your gaze drift, as mine often does, to the sky above. It is, after all, the most universal of canvases, a constant, majestic presence that wraps itself around our spinning planet. We wake to its soft pastel greetings, live beneath its shifting blues and thoughtful grays, and are tucked into slumber by its final, often breathtaking, farewells of orange and deep purple. It is a presence we scarcely question, a foundational element of our earthly experience, as immutable as the steady pulse of a quiet tide. We've all been enchanted by a truly spectacular sunset, haven't we? That fleeting artistry of the atmosphere, painting the clouds with hues that defy imagination, fiery reds bleeding into warm golds, smudged with hints of lilac and deepest plum. These moments, brief as they are, offer us a glimpse into the hidden depths of light and air, reminding us that even the most familiar sights can, in an instant, transform into something utterly sublime. We cherish these spectacles, photograph them, share them, holding them in our memories like precious jewels, knowing they are rare and transient. But what if these transient wonders began to linger? What if the delicate shifting palette of our sky, which we've known for millennia, started to rewrite its own story? Imagine, if you will, that the blues we've always associated with the boundless daytime hours, the comforting azure dome that crowns our days, began to gently recede, almost imperceptibly at first. Not suddenly, not with a jarring dramatic flair, but with the subtle grace of a slow, unfolding narrative, like a forgotten canvas gradually revealing layers of paint that have long lain beneath. Envision the first signs of this quiet revolution. Perhaps it began in the dawn hours, a blush of pink and peach lingering just a little longer than usual, stretching its soft tendrils further across the awakening eastern horizon. Then, as the sun climbed higher, instead of brightening into that crisp, clear sapphire we anticipate, the light might retain a faint golden dustiness, a whisper of apricot that permeated the morning air. Not an ominous gloom, mind you, but a sort of soft focus warmth, like looking at the world through a thin, sepia-toned veil, a gentle diffusion of what we knew as pure, stark daylight. And so, as weeks flowed into months and seasons turned, this subtle shift continued its patient work. The sunsets, once an ephemeral treat, might have begun to deepen in intensity, their reds and oranges growing richer, longer lasting, saturating the western sky with an opulent glow that held fast long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. They would paint the very landscape with an internal radiance, transforming familiar trees into silhouettes edged with molten copper, turning distant hillsides into gradients of carnelian and rust. The shadows, too, would deepen, becoming long and exaggerated, tinted with surprising shades of maroon and indigo, playing an entirely new symphony of light and shade, which brings us to the more pronounced shift, a decade where this profound beauty, this intensified palette, became the enduring characteristic of the sky. The familiar blues and grays of midday might have given way to a persistent, overarching canopy of softened ochre, fading into burnished bronze overhead. At moments, particularly in the later afternoon, the entire firmament could take on the appearance of an enormous diffused crimson lamp, casting its deep, pervasive glow upon everything beneath. It was not the stark, alarming red of a warning signal, nor the harsh glare of an angry ember, but a far more nuanced, enveloping red. Think of the inside of a venerable old wine barrel, polished and imbued with years of liquid history, or the velvety hush within a theater just before the curtain rises, where the low lamps cast a plush, warm light upon the gathered hushed anticipation. This wasn't a world plunged into twilight or forever bathed in the garish glow of an artificial dawn. Rather, it was as if a grand celestial artist had decided to repaint our world, using a brush dipped in Earth's deepest, most primal hues. The leaves on the trees, accustomed to vibrant green beneath a blue sky, would have absorbed this new light, perhaps shimmering with hints of copper and bronze, their familiar verdant tones subtly altered, deepened, made richer in a way that felt both ancient and new. Flowers might have seemed to bloom with an extraordinary, almost otherworldly vibrancy, their reds intensified, their whites warmed to creamy ivories, their yellows transformed into rich gold. The very air itself would have seemed thicker, more textured, infused with the diffused light that now streamed through it. Imagine standing in an open field, bathed in this new, pervasive crimson light. The ordinary grass would ripple underfoot, each blade catching the deep warmth, creating patterns of living velvet. Far off, the horizon might blur into a mesmerizing haze of dusty rose blending earth and sky in an uninterrupted dreamscape. The quality of the light itself would carry a subtle heat, an inferred warmth, even if the air remained cool, weaving itself into the very fabric of how one perceived depth and distance, color and form. Everyday scenes taken for granted for centuries would be recast not in an alien or frightening way, but as if viewed through the filter of a profound collective memory or an antique lens. Children born into this world of deepening reds would know nothing else. For them, the rich, persistent hues overhead would simply be the sky, their reference point for what is natural and unchanging. The vibrant blues would become the stories of their grandparents, a whispered folklore of a different kind of atmospheric artistry, almost mythical in its strangeness. And for those who remembered the sapphire skies of before, this quiet, pervasive transition would be a source of constant, gentle contemplation. It wouldn't necessarily incite panic or alarm, for the change had woven itself in so slowly, so exquisitely, that it became a part of their waking reality, like the gradual fading of an old photograph, only in reverse, a deepening saturation rather than a bleaching. But what could inspire such a patient, profound transformation of the very vault above us? What atmospheric shift so widespread and so sustained could weave such a persistent tapestry of warm, earthy colors into the air we breathe and the light we see? It speaks to an underlying force, vast and silent, far removed from the everyday rhythms of weather patterns, yet undeniably altering the canvas upon which our lives are painted. The sun, our familiar radiant orb, would itself seem changed, its light diffused, softened, its edge sometimes appearing to bleed into the deepening blush of the atmosphere around it. The moon, in turn, would rise and set through these same filters, perhaps appearing more ruddy, more ancient, a muted coppery coin hung in a deep carmine night. This enduring spectacle was not the fleeting breath of a spectacular sunset, nor the hazy, transient veil of localized smoke. This was something far grander, far more deeply ingrained in the earth's intricate workings, yet manifesting its presence in the most ethereal, visual way possible. It was the earth herself, whispering, painting a story in the air above, a story that would reshape perception for an entire generation, forever marking a decade in which the world truly saw itself through a dramatically altered, profoundly beautiful, and uniquely crimson lens. The sky above us, in its deepest memory, often evokes a canvas of boundless blue, touched each morning and evening by the gentle wash of gold, pink, and violet. For generations, for centuries, these hues followed a predictable, comforting rhythm, a soft declaration of the day's turning, or its fading into quiet night. We knew the blush of dawn, the fiery embrace of sunset, and the vast, unblemished cerulean of midday, but there was a time, not so long ago, when this celestial palette underwent a profound, startling transformation. A time when the familiar azure gave way to an extraordinary, lingering scarlet, painting the world in shades both wondrous and unsettling. Imagine, if you will, an ordinary evening on the western coast of a vast continent. The year is 1883, nearing its close. Farmers, finishing their last chores in the fading light, pause as they walk from their fields. Fishermen, returning with their catches, steer their boats towards harbor. Homemakers draw curtains, readying for the glow of gaslight indoors. Their eyes, accustomed to the predictable deepening of gold to crimson, then to the soft, dusty blues of twilight, now observe something subtly, then overtly different. The sunset isn't merely vibrant, it's astonishing. A lurid, almost liquid scarlet floods the horizon, deeper than any they remember. It bleeds upwards, not just a band of color, but a pervasive atmospheric stain that reaches high into the dome of the sky. Then, as the sun finally dips beneath the rim of the world, something else occurs. The twilight doesn't merely dim, it holds, vibrant and resolute. Hues of the deepest ruby, sanguine oranges, and rich dusky purples cling to the air, stretching far beyond their usual scope, often persisting for a full hour, sometimes two, after the sun has truly vanished. Initially, many dismissed it as an exceptionally beautiful, if somewhat strange meteorological event. Perhaps it was a trick of the local atmosphere, an unusual accumulation of dust or mist. Sailors, weathered and wise in the ways of the sea and sky, murmured about red suns and fire twilights, notes exchanged in hushed tones over the railings of their ships. Poets, ever alert to shifts in the world's beauty, found themselves captivated, scrambling for new words to describe a color they thought they knew, but which now appeared reborn. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, and the celestial performance continued, a quiet unease began to settle alongside the wonder. These were not just brilliant sunsets, they were altered skies, every single day, without fail, across vast distances. The earliest reports of these spectacular atmospheric displays came from disparate corners of the globe, seemingly unconnected at first. From a remote archipelago nestled within the vastness of the Pacific, letters carried tales of sunsets so intensely fiery they seemed to burn against the evening sky. Meanwhile, across the sprawling landmasses of Europe, witnesses recounted similar, breathtaking visions, evenings when the light lingered with an unprecedented intensity of red, bleeding into purples so profound they verged on black, stretching across the sky from horizon to zenith. In time, reports converged from busy port cities in the Americas, from remote outposts in Africa, from bustling Asian metropolises, all echoing the same extraordinary observation. The sky had changed. This wasn't a local curiosity. It was a grand unfolding spectacle playing out on the most immense canvas imaginable, which brings us to the crucial element of scale, both in terms of space and time. This wasn't merely a few days of vivid twilight. This atmospheric transformation endured. Month after month, year after year, the crimson signature graced the world's horizons. Imagine growing accustomed to it, watching it transform from an astonishing oddity into a profound, enduring element of the daily experience. Children who gazed up at these new skies during their infancy reached early adolescence without ever truly remembering a world whose evenings were merely pastel and blue. For them, a scarlet sunset was simply the sunset, a part of the natural order of things. Their games played out under a softened, strangely hued light, their stories told around fires whose flames competed with the persistent, otherworldly glow beyond their windows. This pervasive influence extended beyond the fleeting beauty of sunset and sunrise. Even at midday, the sun, when not obscured, carried a subtle tint. The crisp, clean clarity of a typical afternoon often softened into a hazy, almost pearlescent luminosity. Colors of the landscape, of clothing, of everyday objects seemed subtly altered, perceived through a filter of faint amber or rose. White clothes took on a creamier tone. Shadows carried a touch of warmth, and the green of foliage, particularly at certain angles of light, seemed to vibrate with a richer, deeper hue. The world was subtly yet constantly retinted, draped in an ethereal veil that imbued familiar scenes with a quiet, contemplative mood. There was a sense of living within a painting that was constantly being reworked by an unseen hand. And so, this enduring shift profoundly impacted human perception and sensibility. Artists, always at the forefront of capturing the world's beauty, found themselves in a unique epoch. They sought to render these unprecedented colors, struggling to mix pigments that could truly capture the deep saturation and lingering luminosity of the afterglows, as many called them. Landscapes painted during this period often feature skies of breathtaking, almost theatrical intensity, previously unseen in art, reflecting a world now steeped in heightened color. Some masterpieces of the time, revered for their bold and expressive palettes, carry the quiet echoes of this changed atmosphere, forever bearing witness to the vivid skies of that era. What we might now see as artistic exaggeration was, in many cases, a meticulous attempt to convey the startling reality of the prevailing light. But beyond the artist's canvases, the altered skies subtly reshaped everyday life. People who worked outdoors found their rhythms influenced. Farmers watched their crops mature under a strange, often softened sunlight. Mariners, ever reliant on the sun and stars for navigation, adapted to its red-filtered light, learning to read its newly inflected signals on the waves. The timing of activities like washing laundry, which relied on drying clothes under specific conditions of sunlight, might have subtly shifted. Domestic scenes, viewed through window panes, took on an intimate, almost cozy warmth, as if the entire world were perpetually viewed at golden hour. Even conversation by lamplight felt different, the indoor glow merging with the faint, fiery haze visible through the glass. The change in light was more than visual, it was felt in a broader sensory way. There was an increased perception of haziness in the atmosphere, not merely the crisp air one might expect after a clear day. This haziness, though often subtle, scattered light in such a way that it made distant objects appear slightly softer, lending a dreamlike quality to broad vistas. Sunlight itself seemed to carry a different quality, not necessarily dimmer but less harsh, more diffused, as if filtered through a vast, invisible membrane stretched high above the earth. It softened edges, blurred harsh outlines, and imparted a particular kind of quietness to the world, a pervasive sense of gentle attenuation. The feeling was akin to living within an immense stained glass dome, where every ray of light, every view, was touched by a delicate, persistent hue. This subtle yet widespread atmospheric veil gradually moved from being an anomaly to becoming an accepted condition. Initially, wonder, speculation, and a touch of superstition swirled among the general populace. Were these signs of divine displeasure, or perhaps precursors to some cosmic event? The sky, a constant backdrop to human drama, had become an active player whispering mysteries to those beneath it. Yet, as the years drifted by and the pattern of vivid twilights and subtly tinted midday suns showed no sign of abating, familiarity began to replace awe, for children particularly. These skies were simply how the world was. Their sense of normalcy incorporated the red and purple afterglows, the subtly ochre sun. It was merely the way light behaved, much like rain falling or birds singing. The extraordinary had become the ordinary. Meanwhile, among the burgeoning scientific community, the initial flurry of curiosity slowly coalesced into focused investigation. Naturalists and meteorologists, ever diligent in their observations, exchanged letters, collected data from far-flung stations, and meticulously noted the consistency and reach of the phenomenon. They possessed a deep awareness of atmospheric processes, yet this widespread and prolonged chromatic shift presented a genuine puzzle. Barometer readings, cloud formations, and prevailing wind patterns offered some clues, but nothing definitive explained the colossal and continuous nature of the visual effect. They began to suspect a pervasive atmospheric particulate, something truly vast that had been injected high into the air, reaching heights unprecedented for common dust or local pollution. Consider the immense volume of the Earth's atmosphere, a gaseous envelope hundreds of miles deep, surrounding a sphere nearly 8,000 miles in diameter. To affect the entire globe's lighting for such an extended period implied an event of staggering magnitude, a force capable of broadcasting particles across continental distances, carrying them over vast, uninhabited ocean expanses. Such particles would need to be minuscule enough to remain suspended for months, even years, yet numerous enough to collectively refract and scatter sunlight in such a noticeable and consistent manner. Scientists hypothesized about everything from meteor showers scattering cosmic dust to unusual meteorological inversions trapping widespread pollutants. However, the uniformity and global reach of the phenomenon quickly began to narrow their focus. It was in the careful, often slow process of comparison that patterns began to emerge. Records of past astronomical events, major wildfires, and, critically, historical volcanic eruptions were scrutinized. There was a growing awareness that such a widespread and sustained effect often followed truly cataclysmic seismic events, particularly those that violently ejected material high into the stratosphere. The upper reaches of our atmosphere, calm and largely undisturbed by earthly weather patterns, are where such fine particles could indeed linger for prolonged periods, catching the sunlight at precise angles and acting as a planetary scale filter. But for this specific unprecedented decade, what was the source? The answer lay buried, literally, deep beneath the surface of the earth, yet its effects reached to the highest heavens. The whispers and nascent theories coalesced slowly, requiring immense observational effort and collaborative communication across an era where data sharing was still an arduous task. Ship's logs became invaluable, documenting the date and precise quality of sunsets observed at sea. Meteorological stations, sparse as they were, shared temperature anomalies and air pressure readings. Slowly, the focus shifted from a localized cause to one of undeniable planetary significance. This sustained chromatic display, a canvas painted anew each day for years on end, spoke of a single, powerful progenitor, an event whose titanic force rippled through the very fabric of our shared environment. Its footprint was indelible, staining the sky with its enduring crimson memory. The sheer endurance of this phenomenon was perhaps its most remarkable feature. One might expect a particularly brilliant sunset to last a night or a season, but not to redefine the atmospheric norm for over 10 years. This wasn't a transient visual delight, it was a fundamental recalibration of the visual world. Imagine the stories told, the folklore that began to emerge around these persistent crimson skies. Tales passed from elders to children might have included fanciful explanations, woven from local myths and superstitions, trying to make sense of a world that seemed both beautiful and eerily transformed. For many, this changed sky became a backdrop against which life's ordinary joys and sorrows played out, embedding its particular light into the very texture of memory, shaping how people perceived not just color, but time itself. This long, slow unfolding meant that the extraordinary eventually settled into the quiet hum of existence, shaping not just outward appearance, but the inner world of contemplation and wonder. Picture the world as the year 1815 unfolds, a time of quiet anticipation after a long, weary season of conflict. Across Europe, the rumble of cannonades had for a precious moment finally faded, and the fields lay ready for planting, for the hopeful green shoots of spring. Minds wearied by a quarter-century of revolution and war began to turn towards the softer, more familiar rhythms of the land, towards the prospect of a dependable harvest, of mild, predictable seasons. This was a world that largely understood its local weather intimately, through generations of observation passed down from grandparent to grandchild, yet remained largely oblivious to the grand interconnected symphony of global atmospheric flows. The sky above was often blue, sometimes gray, occasionally vibrant with the painterly strokes of sunset, but these were understood as passing moods, familiar visitors. There was a comfort in this perceived predictability, a silent agreement between humanity and the heavens that certain fundamental rules, certain seasons, would always hold. Farmers in New England sharpened their plows, feeling the subtle warming of the earth beneath their calloused hands. Across the vast, still expanding territories of North America, settlers dreamt of lush pastures for their cattle, of bountiful corn and wheat to sustain their growing families through the next winter. In the quaint villages nestled in the valleys of Germany, young lovers strolled beneath budding trees, sharing hopes for long, golden evenings. On the grand estates of England, gardeners planned their intricate designs, anticipating the delicate blooms that would perfume the air with their familiar summer fragrances. This was a world still deeply tethered to the sun's cycles, to the generosity of the soil, to the gentle hand of rain and warmth. News traveled slowly then, by horseback, by sailing ship, by whispered word, making distant calamities feel utterly remote, scarcely real. What happened on a far-flung island, many thousands of miles away across churning oceans, might as well have been occurring on another sphere entirely. The world was vast, disconnected in many ways, and humanity, though observant of its immediate surroundings, knew little of the profound invisible currents that bound the earth's breath together. There was a gentle, almost pastoral peace in this ignorance, a soft cloak against the stark realities of deep time and planetary forces. Yet far to the southeast, thousands of miles away from these tranquil scenes, an ancient, elemental force stirred with an almost imperceptible breath, deep beneath the surface of the earth. On a beautiful verdant island called Sumbawa, now part of Indonesia, stood a mountain of magnificent proportions, Mount Tambora. For many centuries it had slept, cloaked in tropical rainforest, its upper slopes often veiled in mist, its conical form a familiar, silent sentinel against the tropical sky. The people living in its fertile valleys cultivated their crops, gathered the fruits of the abundant earth, and built their lives beneath its benevolent shadow, scarcely imagining the vast reservoirs of heat and stone that simmered beneath its tranquil surface. It had become part of the everyday tapestry of their lives, a landscape feature rather than a geological titan. Stories of its waking past had softened into myths, losing their sharp edges to the gentle currents of folklore, blurring the lines between cautionary tale and whispered legend. Life revolved around the warmth of the sun, the predictability of the monsoons, the richness of volcanic soil that whispered promises of renewal even from a sleeping giant. But now, a tremor, barely a tremor, rippled through the earth's ancient skin, unnoticed by those far-off continents focused on the peaceful passage of their daily routines. Deep within Tambora, magma, vast rivers of molten rock, had been slowly rising, pushing, swelling against the titanic confines of the mountain's architecture. For some months, small, subtle signals had been emerging, distant rumblings, an occasional whisper of ash darkening the jungle leaves, perhaps an unnerving shimmer in the air itself. These were local anomalies, signs observed by those living nearest the giant, understood not as omens of global disruption, but as a part of the mountain's particular temperament, its localized moods. These brave and hardy souls knew the mountain had a spirit, a quiet will, and they learned to live with its occasional sighs and murmurs, interpreting them through their ancestral wisdom, through the shared knowledge of generations. They didn't have thermometers or seismographs. Their instruments were their senses, their bodies, their deep, intuitive connection to the land beneath their feet and the sky above their heads. They understood nature not as a separate entity, but as a vast, living being of which they were an integral, humble part. Then came April, in that unsuspecting year of 1815. A deep, unsettling growl began to issue from Tambora's depths, not merely a sigh now, but a resonant bass note that vibrated through the very bones of the earth, an inescapable prelude. The sky, accustomed to the soft blues and grays of a tropical day, took on an unusual cast, as if painted by an unseen hand with deeper, more anxious hues. Ash began to fall more heavily, a fine, ghostly dust settling on palm fronds and hut roofs, cloaking the world in an unseasonal, pervasive gray. This wasn't merely local. It traveled, carried on the air currents like a grim whisper. Even across the strait on the neighboring island of Java, where the colonial outposts hummed with European administrators, reports of distant explosions reached the ears of officials. Sir Thomas Stamford Raffles, then Lieutenant Governor of the East Indies and stationed far to the west on Java, noted these peculiar events in his careful ledgers, detailing sounds heard and the peculiar sight of floating pumice stones clogging distant seas. He thought perhaps a battle was being fought hundreds of miles away, the vast echoing boom of cannons resonating across the expanse of ocean. The idea that a single mountain could orchestrate such a deafening overture, so widely dispersed and powerful, was simply beyond common human comprehension at the time. On the 10th day of that April, the earth beneath Sumbawa exhaled a breath so profound, so cataclysmic, that its ripple effect would journey far beyond its island home, circling the globe, unseen and uncomprehended, to redraw the invisible boundaries of climate for years to come. The mountain did not merely erupt, it dismembered itself, violently reshaping its summit into a gaping caldera. The very air around it became a swirling maelstrom of unimaginable heat, pulverized rock and roaring gas hurtling skyward with such ferocious power that it pushed through the visible layers of atmosphere, piercing the serene, invisible boundary where weather itself resides, and soared into the high, tranquil stratosphere. This wasn't just an event, it was a planetary rearrangement, a reassertion of geological will on a scale that truly boggles the mind. Imagine a pillar of incandescent fury, taller than any mountain, wider than any city, clawing at the deepest sapphire of the firmament, shedding a shroud of darkness upon the surrounding world. It was a terrifying, breathtaking spectacle, visible for hundreds of miles, described by observers not merely as an explosion, but as the world breaking open. The sound alone was reportedly audible 1,000 miles away, a ceaseless, terrifying thunder that resonated across vast tracts of land and sea. This monumental eruption unleashed something truly remarkable, not just ash that blanketed entire islands, devastating immediate life and landscapes, but also vast quantities of sulfur dioxide gas. This invisible exhalation, much like the human breath, carries vital elements within its ethereal form. But this sulfur dioxide was no ordinary vapor. As it billowed into the high reaches of the atmosphere, miles above where rain clouds form and birds fly, it began a slow, majestic chemical transformation. With the gentle encouragement of sunlight and the presence of water vapor, the sulfur dioxide gradually morphed into tiny, reflective particles, sulfate aerosols. These particles were exceptionally small, too minute to be easily pulled back to Earth by gravity or washed away by the familiar cycle of rain. Instead, they took up residence in the vast, serene, and largely undisturbed currents of the stratosphere, like countless minuscule polished mirrors. They began a slow, silent journey borne by the powerful high-altitude winds that ceaselessly circumnavigate our spinning globe. Picture these invisible wanderers, so delicate yet so potent. Borne by the strong, consistent stratospheric currents, these tiny sulfate particles began to encircle the planet, a silent, reflective veil unfurling gradually around the Earth. It wasn't a sudden, opaque shroud, rather it was a subtle, diffuse curtain, translucent and ethereal, spreading outwards from the tropical birthplace of Tambora. Initially, it formed a hazy ring around the equator. Then, over many months, it diffused and drifted towards the poles, painting a thin, almost imperceptible film across the entire global atmosphere. Think of a very fine, invisible powder sprinkled meticulously across a vast, dark canvas. Each speck, though individually insignificant, collectively transformed the way that canvas interacted with light. And so, this wasn't ash that we saw later in the sky turning red. The heaviest, coarsest ash from Tambora eventually fell back to Earth, choking nearby communities and creating immediate, local desolation. It piled thick upon fields, settled upon rooftops, coated every living thing in a layer of suffocating gray. But the true, lingering effect, the agent of global change, was this ethereal, invisible haze of sulfate aerosols. These microscopic droplets possessed a remarkable property. They were highly reflective. As sunlight, the Earth's great source of warmth and life, began its long journey through space towards our blue marble, it encountered this newly minted atmospheric veil. A significant portion of that incoming solar energy, instead of piercing through to warm the land and seas, was gently but firmly bounced back, reflected into the vast emptiness of space. Imagine a colossal, imperceptible sunshade, deployed high above the clouds, ever so slightly diminishing the sun's radiant touch. The effect wasn't dramatic on any single day, Nor was it easily measured by the rudimentary instruments of the time. It was a persistent, subtle reduction, a slight dimming of the Earth's fiery heart, sustained day after day, week after week. It took time, many months, for this high-altitude veil to fully unfurl and exert its influence globally. As the year 1815 waned and gave way to 1816, subtle atmospheric anomalies began to ripple across the globe. Initially, the most striking effects were seen in the quality of light itself. The skies began to perform unusual, captivating spectacles, especially at dawn and dusk. The sunsets and sunrises, once a familiar blend of oranges, pinks, and purples, began to take on a strange, intensified quality. The world, through its ethereal veil, seemed to look back at the sun with different eyes. Observers, scattered across continents and unaware of each other's experiences, described similar, almost uncanny displays. The setting sun, rather than fading gracefully, would sink below the horizon in hues of intense, fiery red, sometimes shifting through an array of deep ochres, vivid oranges, and even unsettling coppery browns, often lingering longer than usual, painting the western sky with an almost molten quality. Then, just as the fiery core of the sun vanished, the sky would often erupt with a secondary afterglow, a profound, almost artificial violet, a deep, unsettling lavender, stretching high into the darkening heavens. It was as if the very palette of the sky had been expanded, or perhaps skewed. These anomalous sunsets and sunrises became a topic of discussion in towns and villages across Europe and North America, drawing curious gazes from people gathered on their doorsteps, lingering after the evening meal. Farmers paused in their chores, gazing eastward at the morning spectacle, or westward at dusk, some with a quiet awe, others with a hint of superstitious unease. "The sky bleeds," some might have whispered, or "the heavens are unwell." It was a sight that deviated from the comfortable familiarity of generations, something inherently off about the light itself. They noticed the quality of the sunbeams, too. On bright, clear days, the sun itself seemed strangely diminished, its fierce gold mellowed to a softer, almost opalescent white. It lacked its customary vigor, its usual brilliance. The air itself seemed to filter the light differently, imparting an almost melancholic cast to the daylight hours. Objects that should have been sharply defined in the clear sun instead seemed to possess a subtle haziness, as if seen through a faint, colorless film. This phenomenon was noted in the detailed logs of ships sailing the high seas, far from any land. Navigators found the sun a bit more difficult to precisely sight for their astronomical calculations, the atmosphere lending an unfamiliar softness to its disk. This pervasive, altered light was the first widespread, noticeable whisper of Tambora's vast, planetary sigh. It wasn't just the colors of the sky, however. More subtly, the days themselves began to grow cooler. The Earth, receiving less direct solar energy, began to cool ever so slightly at first, but persistently. It was as if the great engine of global weather had been placed on a slightly lower flame, and then the calendar turned towards what should have been the lush green embrace of summer in the northern hemisphere. Farmers, scientists, and ordinary citizens, from the fields of New England to the bustling streets of London and Paris, expected the gentle, consistent warmth of June, July, and August. Their crops were sown, their hopes tethered to the familiar arc of the summer sun. Instead, the season began with an unsettling chill that refused to dissipate. In North America, particularly across New England and parts of Canada, what followed was a series of utterly confounding events. Imagine the spring of 1816, a season where hope usually blossoms alongside the first tender shoots. Instead, the mornings brought an unwelcome crispness to the air, an enduring coolness that whispered of winter rather than spring. People, accustomed to casting off their heavy cloaks by late May, found themselves still reaching for extra layers, huddling closer to dwindling fires, and then, in early June, a season historically celebrated for its gentle warmth and blossoming fertility, the unthinkable happened. The sky, a sky that had begun its day with an unnerving, bruised color, turned ominously dark. The air thickened with an oppressive chill, a cold that seeped into bones and homes, chilling even the very expectation of summer. Snow, powdery and white, began to fall. It wasn't a light dusting, a transient, poetic anomaly. No, it fell steadily, silently, blanketing fields of newly emerged crops, corn, potatoes, young grains, that had only just begun to reach for the sun. The tender sprouts, so full of the promise of sustenance, were smothered by this perverse white blanket, utterly unprepared for such an unseasonable assault. Trees that had dared to unfurl their nascent leaves found their fragile green tips frosted, shriveled, their promise snatched away. In some regions, snowdrifts piled high, mimicking the depths of winter. Families awoke to find their windows glazed with ice, their water pails frozen solid, an unwelcome echo of December in the heart of June. What would normally have been the gentle symphony of chirping crickets and rustling leaves became a silent, desolate landscape, eerily still, muffled by the relentless cold. This unprecedented cold continued, not merely for days but for weeks, a persistent, unwelcome guest throughout the supposed summer. Temperatures often hovered just above freezing, dipping below at night to deliver sharp, killing frosts. Imagine walking through fields in July, where the vibrant greens should have been lush and strong, but instead you see rows of blackened, withered stalks frozen hard and stiff. Corn, the staple crop for many, refused to grow beyond a foot or two, its meager stalks refusing to form ears. The potatoes, underground guardians of winter sustenance, were stunted, shriveled, or simply rotted in the cold, persistently damp earth. Fruit trees, their blossoms nipped by early frosts, bore little or no fruit. Even livestock suffered. Many cattle perished from lack of fodder or simply succumbed to the bitter cold. The summer, the very word "a balm," had been stolen, replaced by an extended, unforgiving twilight of cold and scarcity. The despair was palpable. Farmers who had tilled their fields and planted their seeds with such hopeful diligence watched their efforts turn to naught, their livelihood shriveling before their eyes. The granaries remained eerily empty, the cellars barren. With widespread crop failures, the price of grain and other foodstuffs skyrocketed to unprecedented levels. Many families faced acute hunger, resorting to desperate measures to find anything edible. Imagine entire communities consumed by the silent fear of winter approaching, with no stores, no provisions. The year became known by various names, all echoing the same profound hardship. The year without a summer, 1800 and froze to death, or simply the poverty year. This wasn't merely a hardship, it was a crisis, shattering the very foundations of agrarian life. Across the Atlantic, in the ancient settled landscapes of Europe, a similar yet distinct atmospheric malaise descended. The symptoms were consistent, unrelenting cold and persistent, drenching rain. Instead of snow, much of Europe experienced an unceasing, pervasive dampness that turned fields into quagmires and rotted ripening crops in the ground. Imagine walking through what should have been fields of golden wheat in August, only to find them flattened, blackening, and oozing in an endless gray drizzle. The sun, when it did appear, seemed pale and weak, a distant, hesitant visitor, quickly obscured by scudding clouds and another onslaught of chilling rain. The implications for European society were perhaps even more catastrophic, given the higher population densities and the fragile social order still recovering from the Napoleonic Wars. Crop failures were widespread, from the grain-producing plains of France to the misty valleys of Ireland, from the vineyards of Germany to the orchards of Italy. Famine, a grim specter from earlier, darker centuries, began to stalk the land once more. Wheat prices soared to unthinkable heights, placing even basic bread beyond the reach of countless working-class families and the urban poor. Riots erupted in many cities, fueled by hunger and desperation, as people raided granaries and protested against rising food costs. The social fabric, already stressed, began to fray dramatically. Families, once rooted to their ancestral lands, now faced a cruel choice: starve in place or become refugees in their own country. A vast tragic wave of migration began, as hungry people moved towards cities, hoping to find work or food, or attempted to cross borders in search of slightly better conditions. Imagine countless small family groups, clutching meager bundles, walking weary miles through persistently damp, cold landscapes, their faces etched with hunger and uncertainty. This internal displacement, this silent suffering, stretched across the continent, redrawing human maps of misery. Diseases, particularly typhus and other illnesses associated with malnutrition and overcrowding, surged through the weakened populations. Ireland, already grappling with deep poverty, experienced one of its worst famines prior to the Great Famine decades later. The very ground underfoot seemed to reflect the bleakness of the sky. Yet Tambor's reach extended even further, an invisible hand guiding weather patterns on a truly global scale. Far beyond the Western world's immediate suffering, its effects rippled into the monsoon regions of Asia, subtly shifting the immense atmospheric engine that dictates the seasonal rains crucial for life and agriculture. In India, for instance, the delicate balance of the monsoon system was profoundly disturbed. In some regions, instead of the life-giving rhythmic downpours that nurtured vast rice paddies and refreshed the parched land, the monsoon either arrived late or was unusually weak, leading to devastating droughts. Imagine parched earth cracking under an unnaturally fierce sun, riverbeds receding to dust, and crops withering before they could even produce their yields. This sudden deprivation of water meant widespread failure of the rice harvest, the staple food for millions, pushing immense populations into severe famine. In other parts of the region, the effect was strangely inverted. There were reports of intense, unseasonable rains, leading to devastating floods that destroyed crops and infrastructure. The normal expected patterns were simply gone, replaced by chaotic extremes. This environmental upheaval had truly terrible consequences. Beyond the immediate hunger, these climatic disturbances in South and Southeast Asia were linked to outbreaks of disease that spiraled into global pandemics. For example, it is now thought that the extreme weather events of 1816 contributed significantly to a massive surge in cholera cases, a disease originating in the Ganges Delta. The abnormal monsoon patterns affected water quality and sanitation, creating ideal conditions for the disease to spread. This led to what became the Second Great Cholera Pandemic, a virulent strain that traveled along trade routes, leaving a path of sickness and death through Asia and eventually reaching Europe. The connection between a distant volcano's eruption and the spread of a deadly disease across continents, mediated by atmospheric and hydrological disruption, is a profound and somber testament to the intricate interconnectedness of Earth's systems. Even in distant China, the altered atmosphere exerted its influence. Accounts from this period describe unseasonable cold in summer, even frost and snow in parts of the north and central regions. Imagine a bustling Chinese city, usually vibrant with the sounds and smells of summer, instead finding its streets silent and chilled, its markets disrupted by frozen produce, its people struggling to comprehend a sky that refused its summer warmth. Rivers flooded their banks, crops failed, and the cumulative effect was widespread food shortages and social instability, contributing to peasant rebellions that flared in several provinces. From the high plateau regions to the coastal plains, the anomaly of the sky became the cruel reality on the ground. This global reach demonstrated unequivocally that what happened on one small island could indeed ripple out across every ocean and every continent, affecting human societies with devastating universality. The prolonged period of unusual atmospheric phenomena and profound climatic shifts did not merely impact human societies and ecosystems, it seeped into the very artistic and intellectual fabric of the age. It provided a powerful, undeniable canvas against which the Romantic movement, already enamored with the sublime and the power of nature, could paint its grand, often brooding masterpieces. The year without a summer became a living, breathing backdrop for some of the most enduring works of art and literature. Picture a summer evening, or rather, a mock summer evening in June 1816 by the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. This scene, steeped in the gloom of the anomalous summer, became famously potent. Lord Byron, the brooding poet, found himself hosting a gathering of literary luminaries at his Villa Diodati. With him were the young Mary Shelley, her future husband Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Byron's physician John Polidori. They had hoped for long, sun-drenched days, for idyllic boat rides across the shimmering lake, for conversations under starry, mild nights. Instead, they were greeted by incessant rain, by unseasonably cold temperatures, and by days that faded into prematurely dark, unsettled evenings. Trapped indoors by the relentless downpour, the group began to read ghost stories aloud to pass the time. It was during one of these dreary, uninspiring afternoons, punctuated by the steady drumming of rain against the windows and perhaps the strange, muted light from the sky, that Byron famously proposed a challenge. Each person should write their own tale of the supernatural. From this impromptu contest, born directly from the confinement and perhaps the melancholic atmosphere of the summer that wasn't, two legendary creations emerged. Mary Shelley, then a young woman of 19, conjured the dark philosophical narrative of Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. Imagine the desolate landscape she absorbed from the window, perpetually overcast skies, chill breezes, and absence of the expected warmth and vibrancy. This backdrop, consciously or unconsciously, informed the grim atmospheric descriptions within her novel, creating a pervasive sense of dread and isolation that resonates so powerfully in her depiction of the creature and his creator. The bleak, forlorn alpine scenery and the stormy weather depicted in the novel found an uncanny echo in the actual conditions experienced by its author. It was not a stretch of imagination, but an amplification of the lived reality. The novel, now considered a cornerstone of Gothic horror and science fiction, owes a subtle debt to the strange year it was conceived, reflecting an epoch where the natural world itself seemed to have turned cold and unforgiving. John Polidori, another participant in that gloomy salon, penned The Vampire, often credited with establishing the enduring archetype of the literary vampire. This tale, with its chilling depiction of aristocratic seduction and dark, immortal power, similarly benefited from the atmospheric tension and emotional turbulence of the year. The characters often move through shadowy landscapes, their encounters cloaked in an unsettling light, reflecting the real-world skies that refused to brighten. Lord Byron himself was profoundly affected by the changed skies. He penned a dark and striking poem, Darkness, in July 1816. The poem opens with chilling lines that perfectly capture the collective apprehension of the time. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space, rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and went, and came and brought no day. His imagery of a sunless, desolate world, the fear of cold and scarcity, was a direct, visceral response to the global phenomena, a distillation of the collective anxiety regarding the erratic, disappearing light. His personal despair merged with the planetary mood, crafting verses that mirrored the actual visual anomalies and the pervasive chill. Even earlier, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who famously worked on Kubla Khan years prior, may have subtly woven elements of such unusual weather into his Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Though conceived before Tambora, the romantic obsession with wild, often unsettling nature, and themes of guilt and divine retribution mirrored the unease the public would feel about an unpredictable climate. His vivid depictions of atmospheric phenomena, though fictional, tapped into a profound human response to the grandeur and terror of nature's indifference. Beyond literature, the visual arts of the period also show the subtle influence of the skies. The revered British landscape painter J.M.W. Turner, whose revolutionary approach to light and atmosphere marked him as a visionary, lived and worked during this era. His later paintings are renowned for their intense, fiery sunsets, often rendered in incredible reds, oranges, and dramatic purples, with a deep, almost luminous haze pervading the distant air. Art historians and climate scientists have increasingly theorized that the prevalence of such intensely colored, dramatically lit skies in Turner's work might be a direct visual record of the heightened sunsets and sunrises caused by the Tambora aerosols. Imagine him standing at his window or sketching by the Thames, seeing the world illuminated by these unusual hues, the very light itself becoming a profound source of artistic inspiration. The particulate matter in the atmosphere created by the eruption effectively acted as nature's own filter, scattering light in novel ways, offering artists a palette previously unseen or experienced with such prolonged intensity. These effects made for richer, more evocative descriptions of light and atmosphere. The year without a summer, therefore, was not merely a meteorological curiosity or an agricultural disaster. It was a deeply influential historical moment that shaped the contours of human thought, feeling, and creative expression. It fed into the burgeoning romantic sensibilities of the age, confirming a profound connection between humanity and the elemental forces of nature, reminding an industrializing world that even the grandest human endeavors remain humble against the breadth of a mountain. It painted canvases, inspired poetry, and conceived monstrous narratives, all under a sky that had turned, literally and figuratively, red. It became an indelible marker on the psyche of a generation, a stark reminder of nature's unpredictable power, a muse to the strange beauty that emerges even from climatic disruption. However, despite these profound and visible impacts, a cohesive understanding of what caused these phenomena remained largely elusive for quite some time. The scientific tools and global communication networks that we take for granted today simply did not exist. News of the Tambora eruption, while eventually reaching distant parts of the world, traveled slowly and piecemeal. Early reports from observers in Java about immense ashfalls and colossal explosions were fascinating but seemed to describe a localized tragedy, not a global climate modulator. The notion that an eruption on a remote island could affect harvests in New England and trigger famines in Ireland seemed absurd, almost mystical, to the scientists of the early 19th century. They had no framework, no immediate theory to connect such disparate events across the globe. In the academic and scientific circles of the time, the persistent cold, the frosts, and the ruined harvests were typically attributed to localized weather phenomena, perhaps cyclical variations, or even by some to divine displeasure. Agricultural scientists focused on soil composition, new crop varieties, and local meteorological patterns. Astronomers, observing the unusual optical phenomena in the sky, the fiery sunsets and twilight glows, were deeply puzzled. Some speculated about cosmic dust, perhaps remnants from comets, or unusual formations of ice crystals high in the atmosphere. There were discussions about the changing face of the sun, about sunspots or other terrestrial causes like widespread deforestation. Each field of inquiry, acting in its own sphere, diligently observed and recorded the anomalies within its purview, but struggled to find the unifying thread that bound them all together. There was a profound and uncomfortable disconnect between the local manifestations and a global cause. Yet, amidst this bewilderment, the meticulous observations being made across different continents would, much later, provide the crucial puzzle pieces. Weather records diligently kept by individuals like Thomas Jefferson, who was a keen observer of local climate at Monticello, provided invaluable data on daily temperatures and rainfall that clearly showed the unusual severity of 1816 compared to previous years. Ships' logs, with their records of temperature, cloud cover, and unusual atmospheric optical effects, added further layers of detail from the high seas, far removed from local explanations. Even artists, like Turner, were in their own way making precise, visual records of the unusual quality of light, offering a vibrant, descriptive data set. These individual observations, scattered like precious seeds across the vast fields of global knowledge, lay dormant for decades, awaiting the fertile ground of unifying scientific theories. The burgeoning field of geology began to lay the groundwork for understanding the sheer power of volcanic eruptions. Figures like Charles Lyell in the 1830s promoted the concept of uniformitarianism, the idea that the same geological processes we see today operated in the past, often slowly, but sometimes catastrophically. This idea allowed for the recognition that single, immense volcanic events could have planet-altering consequences. However, even with this evolving understanding of geological forces, connecting an eruption to global cooling required another leap, an understanding of atmospheric physics and chemistry. This part of the puzzle only truly began to emerge towards the end of the 19th century. It was not until the late 1880s, following another major volcanic eruption, Krakatoa in 1883, that a clearer picture began to coalesce. The eruption of Krakatoa, though not as powerful as Tambora, was incredibly well documented by a more advanced, globally connected scientific community. Telegraph cables meant news spread almost instantaneously. Photographs captured the brilliant and persistent sunsets and other optical effects that followed Krakatoa's blast. Scientists, armed with better instruments and a more developed understanding of the atmosphere, observed similar intense sunset glows and measured subtle global temperature decreases. They could track the visible stratospheric dust clouds around the world, understanding their composition and the physics of how they scattered sunlight. This experience with Krakatoa provided the retrospective key to Tambora. Scientists began to look back at the historical records from 1815 to 1816, correlating the eyewitness accounts of red skies and strange atmospheric phenomena with the now understood mechanics of stratospheric sulfate aerosols. They linked the widespread crop failures, famines, and climate anomalies of the year without a summer to the historical evidence of the Tambora eruption. The scientific dots were finally connected, almost 70 years after the event itself. It took the patient gathering of diverse observations, the development of new scientific fields, and the benefit of a subsequent similar global event to finally decode the atmospheric mystery. It transformed what was once viewed as an isolated tragedy and a bewildering series of weather anomalies into a profound lesson in Earth's dynamic interconnectedness. The quiet understanding that finally dawned many decades later allowed for a deeper appreciation of the subtle dance between our planet's fiery heart and its ethereal outer layers. We now comprehend with far greater clarity that a mountain, waking from a deep slumber on a distant island, can with a single immense breath redraw the sky and reshape the climate of an entire planet for years. It reminds us of the profound geological power beneath our feet and the delicate, often unseen balances that sustain life. It reveals that the Earth is not merely a stage upon which human history unfolds, but an active, breathing entity with cycles and rhythms vastly different from our own, whose powerful movements can profoundly influence the very fabric of human existence. The legacy of Tambora whispers of our fundamental dependence on these global systems, reminding us that even the subtle change in the quality of light can set in motion a profound narrative that reaches across continents and through generations. The story of the sky turning red is not merely an anecdote from history. It is a gentle but potent reminder of the unseen connections that bind all living things to the planet itself. It teaches us about humility in the face of nature's power and the intricate beauty of the Earth's interconnected systems, vast and slow-moving, often beyond our immediate sensory grasp, yet always at work. And so, as we allow our minds to drift back to those unforgettable years when the very canvas of the heavens was painted anew, we begin to feel the gentle stir of a much larger narrative unfolding within us. We've traced the arc of a time when the familiar azure above, that comforting, expansive blue we often take for granted, surrendered its dominion to hues of umber and carmine, casting the world in an unearthly glow. It's a tapestry woven not just of dust and aerosols, but of human reaction, scientific awakening, and an abiding sense of wonder, mingled with an ancient unease. When we consider the vastness of that luminous veil stretching across continents and oceans, blanketing an entire hemisphere, we are struck by the sheer scale of the disruption. It wasn't a fleeting glimpse, a momentary spectacular sunset, but a persistent, almost personal, alteration of the very air that surrounded life for an astonishing stretch of time. Imagine for a moment living under that softened, often ominous light day after day, week after week, season after season. The very perception of reality would shift, imperceptibly at first, then with a deeper, more profound resonance. Shadows would lengthen differently. The light filtering into homes would carry a new warmth, or perhaps a chilling melancholy. Each morning would be a spectacle, each evening a performance of cosmic grandeur that slowly yet inevitably carved its own indelible mark into the collective psyche. Looking across all of this, a recurring pattern emerges, one deeply embedded in the human spirit. The oscillation between profound fear and breathtaking awe in the face of the inexplicable. For those generations, observing the sky transform, there was no readily available scientific framework to soothe anxieties. The very air, the life-giving breath of the planet felt different, and in that unknown space, stories would blossom, stories born of prophecy, of impending judgment, of mythical beasts stirring beneath the earth. It is a natural impulse, isn't it, to seek meaning when the familiar breaks its bonds, to imbue the world with narrative when clarity eludes us? The vibrant red would not just be light scattered through particles, but perhaps the flushed face of an angry deity or the spilled blood of an ancient giant. In this way, the raw, impersonal power of nature became intimately woven with human hopes and fears, reflecting back the deepest desires and most primal anxieties of a people attempting to find their footing in an unrecognizably beautiful, yet unsettling new reality. And yet, through that very same filter, eyes also beheld something undeniably majestic. Imagine the poets, the artists, the philosophers, or simply the children gazing upwards, not in terror, but in hushed reverence. The sunsets, once a comforting punctuation mark at the end of a day, transformed into an ongoing symphony of color, deepening into plum and violet, then flaming into fierce oranges and bloody reds before dissolving into the silent, star-dusted velvet. The familiar cycle of light and dark took on an epic dimension, making every sunrise and sunset an event to be witnessed, to be felt deeply within the core of one's being. This quiet appreciation for beauty, even when it arrived veiled in mystery, speaks to a fundamental resilience within the human spirit, an ability to find solace and wonder even amidst profound uncertainty. The aesthetic revolution of those years, reflected in paintings and prose, subtly changed how people perceived light and color, allowing a new palette to emerge from the sky itself. In the quiet spaces between these moments of fear and wonder, we glimpsed the stirrings of another enduring human endeavor, the patient, persistent quest for understanding. Even in an age less equipped with our modern scientific tools, the questions persisted. Why? How? What does this mean? Observations were recorded, speculation shared, theories tentatively advanced. The first fragile tendrils of scientific inquiry began to reach out, slowly, tentatively, to unravel the physical mechanisms behind the spectacular phenomenon. It reminds us that our collective curiosity is an ancient river, ever flowing, ever seeking to carve new paths through the landscape of the unknown. And while the complete, satisfying explanation might have taken decades, even centuries, to fully crystallize, the seed of that pursuit was planted in those awe-inspiring, sometimes terrifying moments beneath the altered sky. This particular alteration of our sky was a poignant reminder of the Earth's delicate and interconnected systems. An event, perhaps thousands of miles away, rippled across the entirety of our shared atmosphere, affecting people whose ancestors might never have conceived of such a global linkage. It gently nudges us to consider how deeply intertwined all life truly is, a vast, complex web of cause and effect, where the beating heart of one corner of the planet can send pulses through the veins of every other. The volcanic dust, propelled to impossible heights, drifting on unseen currents of air, became a silent messenger, proclaiming the undeniable unity of our world. It teaches us a humbling lesson about the fragile membrane that is our atmosphere, a mere breath-thin layer of gases that sustains us, and yet is susceptible to the colossal forces simmering beneath the planet's surface. And when we consider this, we are gently led to a deeper appreciation for the planet as a singular, living entity, capable of both sublime beauty and immense, humbling power. As days folded into weeks, and weeks into months, a fascinating process of human adaptation began to unfold. Life, in its infinite persistence, finds a way to accommodate even the most extraordinary circumstances. The red sky, at first a shock, then a marvel, slowly began its quiet descent into the realm of the normal, an adjusted normal perhaps, but a normal nonetheless. Children who were born during that time might have known no other sky in their earliest memories. Generations matured under that crimson hue, incorporating its strange light into the rhythm of their daily existence, their cultural rituals, their very way of seeing the world. This capacity to absorb the unexpected, to integrate radical shifts into the fabric of daily life, speaks volumes about our species' remarkable resilience and adaptability. We are creatures of habit, yes, but also of profound flexibility, capable of recalibrating our sense of ordinary when the extraordinary becomes a consistent companion. And in this way, the phenomenon becomes something more than just a historical event or a scientific curiosity. It quietly slips into the realm of collective memory and cultural heritage. The stories passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, perhaps subtly embellished over time, transformed into the narratives of towns and villages. It's in these oral traditions, these whispered accounts by a crackling fire, that the event finds its most enduring home within the human heart. These weren't mere meteorological phenomena to those living through them. They were profound life experiences that shaped beliefs, inspired art, and forged connections between people united by a shared spectacle. The memory of the decade when the sky literally turned red thus becomes a shimmering thread in the vast, intricate tapestry of human experience, reminding us that even the most impersonal cosmic forces can leave a deeply personal imprint on our collective consciousness. Ultimately, these reflections bring us back to a powerful, comforting realization about the nature of knowing. For many, initially, the red sky was an enigma, a source of fear and perhaps supernatural dread. But slowly, gradually, through observation, through deduction, through the painstaking work of science, a more concrete, albeit no less wondrous, explanation emerged. The terrifying mystery gave way to a sublime understanding of atmospheric physics and planetary geology. This journey from fear-inducing uncertainty to peaceful, informed comprehension is a hallmark of human progress, not just intellectually, but spiritually. Understanding, when it arrives gently and thoughtfully, often deepens our sense of wonder rather than diminishing it. It reframes the question from, "What terrifying thing is happening?" to, "What incredible mechanism is at play?" And in that shift, there is a profound sense of peace. The red sky, once perhaps perceived as a divine judgment, is now appreciated as a powerful manifestation of Earth's internal life, a testament to the planet's dynamic, living essence. It grounds us, doesn't it, to recognize that we are part of this grand cosmic ballet. The quiet whisper of ancient ash, caught in the currents high above, connecting distant volcanic fires to the gentle blush of a global sky, reminds us of our ephemeral presence within a world of ceaseless, monumental change. And it invites us, in a tranquil, unassuming way, to ponder our own interconnectedness, our own quiet impact, our own gentle journey beneath the vast, ever-changing canopy of our shared sky. This long echo of a bygone era, carried on invisible winds and illuminated by unforgettable light, continues to resonate, encouraging us to look up, to question, and to find both solace and inspiration in the majestic and the mysterious. And so, as the soft embers of our evening's conversation begin to settle into a deep, steady glow, we find ourselves at the gentle closing of this extraordinary story. We've journeyed together through the delicate veil of history to a decade unlike any other, a time when the very canopy above us became a spectacle of profound wonder and, for some, of quiet contemplation or even of fleeting unease. We began this evening by picturing that unprecedented vista. The skies, draped in hues of scarlet and fiery orange, a painter's dream or a poet's haunting muse, stretching across horizons for days, weeks, months, years. A visual symphony profound and unforgettable, indelibly imprinted upon the collective memory of a generation, a decade-long twilight stretching across the world. And now, having understood its delicate genesis, the earth breathing deeply through its volcanic heart, sending plumes of microscopic particles shimmering into the upper atmosphere, catching the golden dance of the sun's fading light in a celestial alchemy, the initial mystery does not vanish, but rather transforms. It evolves from a startling oddity into a magnificent testament to the intricate ballet of our planet, a grand performance unfolding with a majestic, unhurried pace that teaches us humility and awe in equal measure. No longer an enigma, the crimson skies reveal themselves as a testament to the planet's dynamic pulse, a reminder of forces both immense and profoundly natural, weaving the fabric of our atmospheric canvas. In the quiet, after all the details have unfolded, after we have walked through the initial shock and the gradual normalization of that remarkable era, we are left not with alarm, but with a lingering sense of peace and a deepened appreciation for the grand, silent narratives our world continually writes. Imagine for a moment the steady rhythm of life continuing beneath that endlessly blushing sky. The farmers still tended their fields, their silhouettes cast long and purple against the pervasive rose. Children still played, their laughter echoing under an atmospheric ceiling that taught them, from their earliest memories, that the sky held secrets beyond simple blue. Lovers still strolled hand in hand, the world painted in a romantic glow no artist could perfectly replicate. Even the poets and philosophers, initially startled, eventually found new wells of inspiration in the endless crimson, discovering profound beauty in its persistence, adapting their gaze to encompass this new, overwhelming aesthetic. There is a serene lesson here, cradled within the story of the sky's long blush. It whispers to us of adaptability, of the quiet strength in the face of change, even when that change paints the very heavens. It speaks to the human capacity to incorporate the extraordinary into the ordinary, to find beauty even in what might initially seem disquieting, and to ultimately accept the unfolding wonder of the natural world, regardless of how unfamiliar it might appear. The sky did not rage, it simply was. And in its steady presence, humanity learned to live within its vibrant embrace, forging a new sense of normal, appreciating the new spectacle that painted their every dawn and dusk. As we gently close this chapter on an unparalleled decade, we are reminded that our Earth is a living, breathing entity. Its process is often unfolding on scales far grander and more patient than our fleeting lives can fully comprehend. The volcanic exhalations that set the heavens alight for years were but a moment in geological time, a powerful yet transient phenomenon. And just as the crimson skies slowly deepened, shifted, and eventually faded, giving way once more to the familiar spectrum of blue and white, so too do all phenomena on our planet eventually find their way to a natural conclusion, to a renewed state of equilibrium. There is a profound comfort in this understanding. The Earth's endless dance of change and renewal, its elegant restoration of balance. Perhaps then the red sky of that long-ago decade was more than just a climatic event. It was a cosmic mirror. It reflected back to humanity a gentle truth, that even the most seemingly immutable aspects of our world, the very color of the sky, are subject to a magnificent, unhurried flux. And in witnessing this, either through the annals of history or in our quiet contemplation this evening, we are offered a rare gift, the opportunity to glimpse the universe not as a static backdrop, but as a vibrant, ever-changing canvas, constantly being repainted by unseen hands. It invites us to open our eyes more fully to the subtle, ongoing shifts around us, to cultivate a peaceful readiness for the unexpected, and to find wonder in the smallest whisper of change, knowing that grand narratives often begin with delicate adjustments. In the quiet after all this, we are left with a deeper understanding of patience, not just the planet's patient work, but our own capacity for patient observation. We realize that what appears disruptive on a small scale can often be part of a vast, harmonious symphony playing out on a much larger one. The decade when the sky turned red was a testament to Earth's own rhythms, to its power and its delicate balance, to the way sunlight interacts with the finest dust, and for us, in this quiet moment, it serves as a soft, comforting reminder that our world, in all its astonishing complexity, continues its intricate dance, perpetually evolving, ceaselessly beautiful. And so we find ourselves, as the narrative threads are gently gathered, bathed in the warmth of a story well told and deeply felt. Take with you the image of those rose-colored heavens, not as a source of alarm, but as a soft, luminous memory of a world rich with unexpected hues and boundless wonder. Let it be a gentle whisper of the earth's enduring magic, an invitation to observe the world around you with a renewed sense of quiet awe, and a comforting reassurance that even the most dramatic of natural displays eventually recede, leaving behind not chaos, but the serene calm of an evolving cycle. As you settle into wherever you are, whether it's the deepening quiet of night or the soft repose of a lazy afternoon, allow the images we've shared to mingle gently with your own thoughts. Understand that the universe continues its patient, artistic work, sculpting beauty from every element, every breath, one gentle moment at a time. It asks nothing of us but our gentle gaze, our open minds, and our quiet appreciation. Rest well, dear traveler of stories. May your own sky, in its steady, familiar hue, be a continued source of peaceful contemplation, filled with its own unique and beautiful secrets, waiting patiently for your discovery. Until we meet again, in this cozy corner of wonder, carry this peace within you.